Okay, let's unpack this. For decades, physics has tried to create models of reality models that, describe what reality is.
Right. We have our particles, our forces, space, time, all the building blocks.
Exactly. But today we're looking at a framework that's, well, it's incredibly ambitious, and it attempts to describe something else entirely, the dynamics of what reality is actively becoming.
And that's the core of Vadim N. Cheryshev's invariant becoming theory, or IBT. In Russian, it's the Okromo os Elef.
What's so fascinating to me here is that it's pitched as this interdisciplinary framework. It's trying to unify high-level math, physics, complex systems theory.
All into one model. And that model says reality is just the continuous evolution of a single fundamental field.
So our mission for you, the listener, is really specific today. We want to provide a rigorous shortcut, a way into the mathematical and systemic foundation of IBT.
And we have to focus purely on the core definitions, on the function of the equations.
Because this whole area gets pulled into some really confusing territory, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So we have to immediately draw a line in the sand.
Yes, we have to. The source material is adamant about this. IBT is a scientific philosophical model. It is rooted in mathematics.
It's explicitly not a spiritual teaching.
Not a religion, not a channeling method, and it is absolutely not a set of, psychotechniques for having some kind of subjective spiritual experience.
We're dealing with field dynamics.
Yeah.
That's it. Not faith, not mysticism.
Right. So if you came to this deep dive looking for, confirmation of universal consciousness in that kind of new age sense.
You have completely missed the point of Cheryshev's model. We're here for the analytical engine.
Okay, so to get into that engine, we have to define the basic building block, the ontological core.
And IBT postulates only one thing, right?
Only one object, the monadic field. It's represented by the wave function xi.
Just one.
Yeah.
That seems incredibly sparse. Why is it so important that the monad is the only thing that's postulated to exist?
Well, think about it. If you only have one object, then everything else, matter, energy, space, you name it, it all has to be derived from that one thing.
So it's an excitation or a pattern within that single field.
Exactly. It simplifies your starting assumptions dramatically. And the source is crystal clear on this point. The monad is not a spirit.
It's not a self.
And it has no consciousness in the way we usually think of it. It's just the fundamental field, the substrate of existence.
Okay, and if reality is all about this process of becoming, not fixed things, then we need a different kind of clock to track it.
And that's where tau comes in, the parameter of becoming.
So tau is operational time. It's not the same as the psychological time we experience, the time on our watches.
Not at all. It's the fundamental variable that's actually driving the system's evolution. It defines the process of the monad changing into what's next.
Which brings us right to the math.
Yeah.
Now, we're definitely not going to read a complex differential equation out loud.
No, that would be an absolute audio nightmare.
But we need to know what the functional parts are. It's a generalized nonlinear evolution equation for that monadic field, and it has three main components.
Component number one is basically how the field evolves over that operational time, over tau. The second part is the Nabel-Tutu term.
The spatial structure operator.
Right. You can think of this as the classical part, the bit that defines how waves spread out and exist in space.
It sounds like standard physics. But this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? The third component.
This is the absolute core of the theory, the nonlinear self-interaction term. It has a constant lambda, and then it's basically the field's intensity multiplied by the field itself. Lambda c side c.
So the field is interacting with itself.
Explicitly. And in a nonlinear way. That term is the structural glue for the entire system. It's what prevents the monad from just diffusing away into random noise.
So that lambda term is literally the mathematical definition of unity in this theory.
It is. If that term wasn't there, the universe would just dissipate. The fact that reality is a coherent whole is ensured by this mandatory nonlinear self-interaction. That's a huge statement.
But there are also constraints on these dynamics. And this is where the structure quantization condition comes in, which is a topological invariant.
It sounds abstract, I know, but think of it this way. It involves this closed contour, gamma doll, which is called the radiant. And it exists in a theoretical five-dimensional manifold.
The five-dimensional manifold.
But its function is what matters. The radiant isn't some spiritual portal. It's the geometric rulebook. It determines the possible trajectories, the world lines of any structure in the monadic field.
So it sets the speed limit, basically, the limits of physical possibility.
And its geometry is linked back to something fundamental, the Planck length.
But hold on. if our reality is 4D, space-time, how is a 5D manifold actually useful?
It's useful because that 5D manifold, the radiant, it defines the potential space, the underlying architecture of what's possible, from which our 4D reality is then derived.
So it's not an extra dimension you can walk into.
No, not at all. Think of it more like a constraint, a boundary condition that's just built into the math itself, ensuring that the structures we see are stable.
Okay, so since the math sets all these constraints, IBT organizes its structural certainty around 4 fundamental laws.
And they're all derivable directly from that big nonlinear equation we were just talking about.
They aren't just tacked on. They're consequences of how this monadic field works.
Exactly. They have to be true if the model is true.
So law number 1 is the law of existence. This is basically a conservation law, right? The invariance of the field norm.
It is. Mathematically, it just means that if you integrate the squared magnitude of the field over all of space, it has to be a constant. Ksc2 dV equals const.
It keeps the system stable, makes sure energy and probability are conserved.
Right. Without it, the whole thing would be unstable.
Then we get to law 2, which is, I would argue, the most defining law of IBT, the law of unity.
And we've already touched on its mathematical root. The integrity of reality, its wholeness, is guaranteed by that explicit nonlinear self-interaction term.
The lambda p in name part.
That's the one. The universe is unified because its fundamental component is literally forced to interact with itself coherently. That cohesion is unity.
Okay, and the consequences of that unity are then spelled out in law 3, the law of reflection.
This law just states that the observable structures we see, everything from an atom to a galaxy, they arise directly from the symmetries and the topology of the underlying system.
So it links back to that spatial operator, the noble 2-2, and the geometric rules from the radiant.
In simple terms, what you see is a reflection of the hidden rules of the field.
And finally, law 4, the law of change.
This one is straightforward. It just confirms that any evolution, any transformation is fundamentally determined by the derivative with respect to that becoming parameter, tau.
So tau isn't just some passive variable. It's the ontological driver.
It is. If something changes, it changes with respect to the parameter of becoming. And those 4 laws together give the model its self-consistent dynamic structure.
All right, now we have to step into what is probably the trickiest part of this whole discussion.
The vocabulary.
The vocabulary. This is where IBT is most frequently and I think aggressively misinterpreted.
Oh, absolutely. The theory uses common words that carry a ton of esoteric or spiritual baggage, but it assigns them these strict, purely systemic analytical definitions.
So we have to apply that conceptual filter we talked about very deliberately.
We have to. For instance, if the average person hears the word consciousness, they immediately think of personal awareness, a soul, a higher self.
But in IBT, consciousness is defined as a fundamental ontological property of complex subsystems within the monad.
Its function, its job, is to generate, stabilize, and reflect internal models of external structures. That's it.
So don't think of a human soul. Think of an incredibly advanced, self-correcting thermostat in a hyper-complex machine.
That's a great analogy. Its measure is its efficiency, and the source is explicit. It is not a personality, not a soul, not a higher mind.
Then you have the word recoherence.
Right. Which sounds like it should be a meditation technique or a way to align your chakras or something.
But systemically.
Systemically, recoherence is a regime of increased coherence and order within a subsystem. It's described by the growth of an order parameter.
It's just a mathematical process, the inverse of decoherence at the level of field dynamics.
It's about a system achieving greater internal efficiency, not spiritual retuning.
And what about the observer? That term is loaded even in standard quantum mechanics.
In IBT, the observer is simply any sufficiently complex and stable subsystem whose interaction with the field leads to state selection.
A reduction of a superposition.
Yes. And it's characterized by a formal parameter, delta theta choice. It doesn't have to be a person. It could theoretically be a self-stabilizing ecosystem.
As long as it meets the complexity criteria.
Yeah.
It's defined by its function, not its feeling.
Exactly. Then there's systemic connectivity, or omega. This is a dimensionless parameter that characterizes the internal coherence, stability, and efficiency of a subsystem.
Like an organism or even a single cell.
Right. And a high omega correlates mathematically with process optimization. But again, the framework issues a very strict warning.
High omega is not the same as the subjective human experience of joy or happiness.
Or morality. It's a metric of systemic health. Nothing more.
So the message across all of these terms is the filter. IBT is built on definitions that come from field equations. It deliberately ignores concepts like God, karma, chakras.
Messages from higher beings, or the idea that intention creates reality. It's the ultimate anti-fuzziness framework. It wants to replace ambiguous terms with measurable systemic descriptions.
So given all of this rigor, this mathematical certainty we've been talking about, we now come to the part of the theory that throws the biggest wrench into conventional thinking.
Vadim's paradox.
This is officially called the hypothesis of non-additivity of probability. What happens when you have a system operating under really strong nonlinearity, and it's highly coupled with a complex observing subsystem?
And the proposal is that in those regimes, the total probability measure might formally exceed unity, 1 plus epsilon.
A probability greater than 1. I mean, that just feels wrong. It feels like a physical impossibility.
It's deeply counterintuitive, and that's why it's called a hypothesis. It requires verification. But IBT argues that this little epsilon, the small excess parameter, it's a systemic effect.
It arises from the complex nonlinear self-interaction of the monad.
Especially when a complex observer gets involved. It's not necessarily a violation of the fundamental axioms of probability. It might be an artifact of the dynamic nonlinear interaction within the system itself.
But if that little excess, that epsilon, actually exists, it has to fundamentally change our ability to predict things.
It has to.
If systems can just subtly generate a little more probability than the total space allows, what does that say about the limits of our standard models?
It implies that for the most complex, highly coupled phenomena-like systems that have what IBT calls consciousness are linear, additive models will just break down.
That self-interaction term, the lambda statu pyron, ensures the universe is non-additive.
Subtly, but fundamentally.
And this complexity is also where IBT gives a functional definition for something that's often seen as mystical: intuition.
Yes, precisely. Within IBT, intuition isn't mystical at all. It's functional. It's defined as a local mechanism for a complex system to orient itself.
Based on what?
On the ultra-fast processing of implicit patterns and feedback loops that haven't bubbled up to conscious modeling yet. It's an evolutionary tool for survival. It's not a source of absolute truth.
And this whole rigorous approach is summed up perfectly by the theory's official success criterion.
Right. A response based on the theory is considered correct only if it can be understood and used by a researcher who's interested in non-standard models for complex systems.
And not by someone seeking metaphysical comfort. The intended audience is the analytical researcher, period. So, after all that, what does this mean for you, the listener? We took a deep dive into Vadim Cheryshev's invariant becoming theory. I think the core takeaway is this relentless emphasis on mathematical formalism and process.
It really is. IBT forces you to abandon all these colloquial or spiritual definitions and instead view reality as this dynamic process.
Driven by a single nonlinear field, the monad, where even familiar concepts like consciousness and coherence are just reduced to systemic descriptors that come from equations.
It's a fascinating attempt to build a unified theory where the operational reality is defined by that process of becoming, by that parameter rather than by some fixed state of being. The model's real strength is its commitment to certainty derived from its nonlinear core.
But we have to end with the framework's most challenging speculation: Vadim's paradox. If reality is described by these nonlinear field dynamics, and if this hypothesis of non-additivity actually holds, that in these highly complex systems, the probability measure can formally exceed 1, what does that tiny excess parameter, that epsilon, ultimately imply about the limits of our own measurement and prediction?
Well, it suggests there's an irreducible systemic effect, something generated by high complexity and self-interaction that stands just outside the bounds of conventional statistical mechanics. If our most complex systems are inherently non-additive, perhaps that small epsilon is the signature of true emergence, a subtle signal that the universe is always just a little bit more than the sum of its parts. It leaves us with a question, doesn't it?
Which is,
can we ever truly predict the behavior of a system, like ourselves, that is fundamentally defined by its own nonlinear self-reference?